Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I feel very honored to be here. I have my first slide is perhaps a little bit misleading because I'm not going to talk about this kind of priest, and I'm not going to talk about Roman things. This one? Yeah. Okay. But I happened to be in the British Museum last week, and I took this picture because I thought it would be quite nice. So what did the Greeks make of Near Eastern priests? I will give you a very brief overview of the literature we have on that topic, and then I will look into the actual evidence from Greece and show you what we have. I will start with someone you might know, Herodotus of Halicarnassos, who is the first person really to mention these priests. He wrote this history of Greece, or actually the history of the Persian wars, the wars of the Greeks against the Persians in the 5th century. And he, in doing that, explains the whole wide world, the ethnography, so to speak, of everything non-Greek. So he is the first source, so to speak. And Herodotus has a specific focus, and that is on Egyptian priests. So I guess I have to mention this because I think that kind of has tainted the general view of the Greeks on priests, because he was quite obsessed with them. He mentions priests 41 times in his 9 books. 36 references are to Egyptian priests of these 41 references. They are all in Book 2, which is dedicated entirely to Egypt. And then there's this one reference to the priests of Bel in Babylon. Now, there's 4 other references to Greek and other priests, but that's about it. So the way Herodotus in Book 2 describes these priests is quite positive. So he's talking about them, that there were the real facts I learned at Memphis from the priests. So he really trusts them, and this comes up again and again and again. So the way he talks about those Egyptian priests is quite convincing. So people have argued, actually, it's not only Herodotus' imagination, but actually he has talked to those priests, and these priests have informed him quite well, and were also very keen on him knowing stuff about Egyptian history. He also describes them, and here I just give you very, briefly an image here. This is from Vesely. This is a grave stele of a priest of Isis, who is also depicted here as having a shaved head and handing out a sacrifice here. Now, that's as much as I want to say about the Egyptian priests, but you get the picture. So we have a preference in Herodotus for that kind of thing. Now, the bit that you probably know, some of you may know, is this in Herodotus on the occasion that he visited Babylon, and he then talks about the Chaldeans here a bit differently. As the Chaldeans say, who are priests of this god, these same Chaldeans say, though I do not believe them. So clearly here there's a difference in how he treats the priests. Some of them, so the Egyptian priests being the ones who tell the truth, whereas the Chaldeans not so much. The next source I want to briefly look into is Diodorus Siculus, so 1st century, sitting in the Library of Alexandria and writing his history of Greece. And he's also interested in the Chaldeans. He's saying, it doesn't seem inappropriate to speak briefly of the Chaldeans, of Babylon, of their antiquity. And he's quite impressed by them as well. But again, also he compares them to Egyptian priests. Basically, imagine an Egyptian priest and you know what a Babylonian priest is like, a little bit that kind of thing. Then also very interested in the way they study all their life, the fact that they are diviners at the same time, soothsayers, and all of this. So this is all kind of the stereotype that we then have at that period of Babylonian priests in Greece. He goes on, and then he talks about the training, and this is quite fascinating for him because in all these matters it is not the same as that of the Greeks. Clearly there's a huge difference between Near Eastern priests and Greek priests, which is certainly true, because Greek priests, of course, were not trained. Anybody could be a priest. There's no rules for priesthood, really, apart from a few occasions at Athens or so, where we have hereditary priesthoods, but mostly it's a non-specific kind of side job that you would take on top of whatever else you do. He's clearly fascinated by that. And again, I'm not going to go into that, but the next actual description of a Near Eastern priest would then be Lucian, who talks about the Syrian goddess Atargatis in Hierapolis, and does describe in a bit more detail the various offices that come together for her sacrifice. Now, what I would really like to do is to look a little bit at what happens when these priests come to Greece, and what they do there. And I've focused on two areas, the Aegean here and then Thessaly, because we have a new inscription from that area which might be of interest to you. It definitely is of interest to me. So I thought I'm being a bit cheeky and ask you about this inscription because I think you might be able to help me. So first of all, very famously, the sanctuary of Atargatis and Hadad in Delos, where we have actual evidence of a cult of Atargatis or Astarte on the island. Here you see the sanctuary, clearly not your typical Greek sanctuary, which would have a main temple and then an altar in front of that. So here we have a priesthood, and this priesthood, as far as we can reconstruct, has 7 priests from Hierapolis. They're annual and they're elective, that we know from the inscriptions. And these little masks here were found in a house. And I'm not going to suggest it was a priestly house. I'm just going to say these were found there. And some people have suggested that perhaps they look a little bit like the headdress, or the headdress looks a bit like the headdress of the priests from Hierapolis. But this is, of course, much later here. So this is like 400 years later. So we have to be a bit careful there. But it is odd. I mean, this is not a typical Greek headdress. Yeah. So there might be some truth to this. So this would be one. I'll just show you one inscription of these priests. Here we have Archaeos, son of Apollonius, Hieropolitan, elected priest for the year, dedicated to Hadad and Atargatis, the ancestral gods, on behalf of himself and his wife, and then it goes on. You can see the priest himself has not only a Greek name, but also his father already had a Greek name, so very Hellenized family, probably already kind of speaking Greek before coming to Greece. So you can see in the name there's not very much here, but they claim to be Hieropolitan, and this goes through for the next for the other 7 priests too. What happens next is that the sanctuary is taken over by Athenian priests, so that is after 118. It's not entirely clear because it doesn't really relate to the fact that Delos was occupied by Athens. That happens much earlier, so it's kind of a later development. Whether they ran out of priests or what happened here is not entirely clear. However, we have Athenian priests in charge here now, and we have their daughters which serve as basket carriers. But I'm not entirely sure about certain things here. So we have these priests dedicating objects that are clearly, at least linguistically, from the Aramaic area. So we have an aegon here, and we have a namara. Whether these priests, whether this is tokenism, so to speak, whether these priests just do that in order to kind of keep the appearance of being somewhat non-Greek is unclear, whether they have an actual relation here. But I just present the evidence here. And this happens again, so there's 4 times dedications of these objects here. What happens around Delos? We have a few instances. Here, Astypalia, a little bit further south, and then Samos, where we have inscriptions which mention priests or, related again to Atargatis. And here we have also the focus on the ancestral gods, so this clearly seems to be something that they brought with them. In this inscription here, it was resolved by the goddess Atargatis and the association of the ancestral gods, and then since Ophelion, again a Greek name, son of Ination, who has been approved by the goddess through the casting of lots, has been a priest of the ancestral gods and a good man. So this is probably a group of migrants who came there and set up this cult. That's the idea. set up their priesthood. 2 inscriptions from Samos also mention the Syrian goddess and a priesthood, but they're very fragmentary, so we can't really get much information out of this. However, if you go a bit further up north, here, direction Thessaly here, there are also a few instances where we have inscriptions of priests, which are from a Near Eastern background. So we have mostly Phoenician, like here Asclepiadas, son of, we don't know who, a Sidonian, and down here a Phoenician text, which I couldn't find a translation for, I'm afraid, sorry, and I don't read it. Here we don't know which god this priest served, but this is what we have. And of course, I've only, a little bit with Jonathan, only taken instances where we have not 5, but 1 indicator, and that is priest. Yeah, so I've stuck to that. I've only looked at actual priests. So from the so we have 2 more inscriptions. So one from again from Thessaly, Scotusa, and then Macedonia from Varia. A Sidonian here who is also a priest. Again, we don't know which god he served. He might have been a priest of Athena, for what I know. So it's completely unclear. However, he is Sidonian, and he mentions it. The fact that that these people mention it means something, because the Greeks normally don't really put that on their inscriptions. Okay, and then down we have the last inscription for Apollonides, son of Dexilaus. He's a priest of Artagatis, the savior. Now, if we go a bit further up from Demetrius, north, Marmarini, a farmer really discovered an inscription a few years ago, which was called a bombshell by the leading expert on Greek religion, because he couldn't make much of it, or, well, a little bit. I'll tell you what we think this is. So here, this is the inscription. You can see a very long text on the side A, which is less well preserved. We have the first opening 21 lines missing. And then we have approximately 80 lines per side. It dates on paleographic grounds to the 2nd century, and likely to the first half of the 2nd century. And really the theme here is sacrifices and ritual that are permitted or required in the sanctuary of Heteos, the goddess. We don't know which goddess this is. There have been some suggestions, and you might have some too. And there's a bit of information about the architecture, and it looks like this was a rural sanctuary, but not a small one, because there are quite a few shrines, and there are quite a few altars, and very many gods are named here. The first thing that surprised the Greek historians was actually the fact that we have 2 major festivals which we've never heard of, the Alulaya or Elulaya and the Nisania, which of course don't fit in this context. So what do we do with them? It has been suggested, and I have to trust my colleagues here, that this has to do with the Mesopotamian lunar calendar, that these festivals were basically based on that. You look at me like, yeah, of course it is. For me, this comes as a total surprise. And they were then likely merged with the local calendar of Larissa, which is the next nearest town, and that would then bring the Elulaya into September, October, and the Nisania into April, March. Now, the next thing that surprised us is the ways of sacrifice described here. And I'm not mentioning all 10 ways, because it's a very long inscription. I have copies if you want to have a copy after this. So a lot of bird sacrifices. This is something, again, this is not very usual in Greek temples. There are some birds, mostly to Aphrodite, doves, that kind of thing. And chickens are really rather the cheap sacrifice that you would do on an everyday basis. However, there's quite a focus on that. And we have a word here, again, if anybody knows, very happy to hear that, truba, which we can't identify what that might be, some sort of a bird, it seems. Then we have Holocaust sacrifices, which again are very untypical for Greece. There's actually only, one exception of this. So again, we have no parallel for this. And then a lot of emphasis on frankincense. And again, here I recall Herodotus in the Babylonian temple. He's talking about how they offered 1,000 talents weight of frankincense. He's quite, smitten by that. And it seems to be, again, not a very Greek thing to do. Now, the other thing that surprised us were the table offerings. Now that I've been here today, I know exactly what it is. However, the word trapezoplegia is new. So this is a word that we didn't know before, but this seems to be the Greek expression for laying the table for the gods, as you have described earlier. Then there's a line which talks about the sensing of the ear and hair of the goddess. Again, this is something very, unique. So it gives some information what you can sense the ear with. Then side B has this clause here, which says, now if you would like to sacrifice to the goddess by the Greek rite, it is permitted. However, you can sacrifice no pig, basically. Yeah. So clearly, this is not a Greek thing, but Greeks can, if they like, sacrifice something that way. You see where I'm going. Another thing that I think is interesting is the initiation to the goddess Telete Testiu. So normally we say mysteries, initiation is a very Greek thing, and there's clear ideas of how this works. Here it's a little bit different. If you want to be initiated here, you have to tend to the goddess for 3 days, and then you must be shaved. Nobody shaves in Greece. I mean, not like that, not in a ritual context, of course. An athlete, young men shave. However, so this again is something that is definitely not Greek. I have an idea where it comes from, especially after today. The other thing that we are not entirely sure about is if an unpurified person wants to be initiated, let him diakleinen. We don't know this word. It's again a new word. His mouth, and this is supposedly with a bird. It doesn't really, has no parallel. So I think there is a mouth cleansing ritual somewhere out there, but not in Greece. Yes. Okay, there we go. So, oh gosh, I feel really stupid now. You know this all. Okay, so let's carry on. So basically what I want to say, this is nothing like I've ever seen. Quite surprising to find this here in Thessaly, in rural Caesarea. Now, certain things, so there are, again, when it comes to purity and pollution, this seems to be only to apply to women, which is unusual. In Greek texts, it's normally both men and women, or it's specified this is for women, this is for men. So this again, lengthy occlusion after childbirth, this is quite unusual, 30 days, usually it's 10 days. Here we have 30, 40 days for abortion, that's pretty normal. But the rest, not. So sexual intercourse is also women only, which is quite unusual. Normally it's especially for men after sexual intercourse with the own wife 1 day, with a prostitute 3 days, and so on, but not for women. So, and during after menstruation is something that we really don't have in Greece. There are parallels, but they are always relating to Near Eastern or Egyptian cults. So again, this is nothing Greek. The Greeks have not such a problem with menstruation. So the other thing that comes up here are lots of gods that we don't know. The only one that we have attested in Greece is Men, who is an Anatolian god, as you probably know. We have the unknown goddess, who's still to be named. We have Moira, and this isn't Moira, of course, Moirai, the plural, will be the 3 fates, and they appear in Greece. However, in the singular, we don't have them at all. So it has been suggested this might be an interpretation of a non-Greek deity. We don't know. We have Adara, who shares an altar with Lila, or Lilias, so we have these 2 words there. Moga, Alaya, and then Pan, whom the Syrians call something or other Plen. And here we have the problem that, well, no, actually it's great, because for once they say there is a Pan and there is a interpretatio Graeci here, which normally we don't even get. So we get an indication here, an interpretation, an attempt to interpretation. So if we look at the cult personnel, we have one priestess, just a hierea, just a priestess, and then we have various female ritual agents. One of them, they are called phoibatriae. So these, again, the word is new, but it seems to be meaning purification official. And usually in Greek texts, when it comes to purification, there are no specialists for that, but it tells you if you need to purify, what you do is you do this and this and this. So you do it yourself. Yeah, there's a self-guide of how to purify, basically, in sanctuaries where this is required. So here, we don't have that. We have someone who is specifically in charge of that. A lot of the purification is done with birds. Again, yeah, not too usual for us, probably for you. And then we have a neokoros. This is just the temple ward, and this is something that could come out in any other sanctuary too. Now, so to conclude, I guess what we see here is something that is mostly Greek in appearance in terms of the way the inscription is structured and all of this, the language, the vocabulary mostly. But then we have a lot of non-Greek elements with multiple origins, so you can't really say it's one or the other. It seems to be a mixture of various rituals from around the world, so to speak. But the fact that these Mesopotamian calendar is used is particularly interesting because I showed you before the priests, they were all Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians would not, I guess, use this Mesopotamian calendar, so someone else must have kind of mingled in here. And the other thing is the sacrifices and rituals are very complex. If I give you the inscription, you will read it, but now it becomes a bit clearer to me. It's really like cooking a meal. It makes more sense. And then of the 11 deities, only 3 are Greek. So we have Helios, Artemis, and Apollo, but the other 8 are non-Greek, apart from Man, who is not Greek, but he is worshipped elsewhere in Greece. So you could perhaps say, or I would call it a hybrid cult of a cosmopolitan but local character, which was perhaps established by a group of individuals coming from various backgrounds, but it does show something that is interesting for us, that in this area, in the 2nd century already, it was very multicultural, which we didn't think before it was. The way the inscription is written in Koine Greek also kind of gives that idea of a very kind of, worldly society, if you wish, cosmopolitan society. And I think, that's raises some questions, especially in the context here that I, learned today. Who commissioned the inscription? Because we are missing the first 21 lines. Usually such an inscription would be commissioned by the priest of the sanctuary or the city. So these 2 things could be. Here we don't know. But who was charged in the keeping of this ritual? Someone must have been there who knew what they were doing. And then what is the source of knowledge of these things that were done and happened here? Right, so these are my questions. Thank you.